every morning. When you go to work, when you go to school, when you strive to create a career. We care about health as much as you do, in Europe and worldwide. And we keep looking for new and better ways to make life easier. We believe in doers like you who keep on going no matter what, who do their best to give their best. We are part of your towns and cities, of the ordinary moments of your life, of your projects and dreams. And we will keep preparing for the future, a planet that is green and sustainable, where products are recycled and reused. We are by your side when the day is over, ready to take you home.
One.
And to the stars.
Lift off.
So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the EIB Group's press conference on 2022 results. Thank you very much for coming here today. Now, Brussels is home from home for the EU Bank, so there are several colleagues here today whom you can ask questions, including after the press conference itself. So along with President Werner Hoyer, good morning, President. At the table, we have Mariut Falkstedt, CEO of the European Investment Fund, Jean-Christophe Laloux, Head of EIB Operations, Barbara Balke, the Secretary General, Markus Berndt, the Head of EIB Global, and Laura Piovesan, who is the Head of the Projects Directorate of the EIB. And there are other members of the Bank's Management Committee today here in the room. Good morning, Vice Presidents Ambroise Fayol, Teresa Czerwinska, Liliana Pavlova, Thomas Hosters, Christian Peters, and Ricardo Mourinho. And other senior managers are also here to answer your questions. President Hoyer will open with some remarks, and then we will go into the question and answer session. Like other years, you have access to all the materials that we will refer to online. And there are a couple of things that are different from last year. The more observant among you might have already noticed. But at this point, I would, without further ado, give the floor to President Hoyer. President.
Grazie, Matteo. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to see you all at this year's press conference. For the first time under our new logo, which places the EU banks with visual identity firmly part of the European family. The EIB is the Bank of the European Union, and the new logo makes it clear. We contribute with our financial and sectorial expertise to meeting the Union's many challenges. The founder of our Union famously said, Europe will be forged in crises and will be the sum of the solutions adopted for those crises. We are now in the midst of not one but many crises triggered by Russia's senseless war of aggression against Ukraine. Over my 11 years of service in the bank and before 25 years in foreign affairs, I've seen Jean Monnet's wise words confirmed again and again. I have no doubt that also this time Europe will emerge stronger, wiser and more united than ever. In 2022, the EIB Group, that is to say the bank and our subsidiary, the European Investment Fund, signed financing agreements totaling 72.5 billion euros. Every euro went to projects that furthered sustainable and resilient economies in Europe and beyond. And we delivered on our promises and exceeded our targets. At the beginning of 2022, we were anticipating a lower level of activity. That all changed, however, with the war. Behind these massive numbers, you can find real, tangible impact. We proved again that the European Investment Bank is among the world's biggest supporters of human ingenuity and innovation. Just as we financed BioNTech's development of the first vaccine to beat COVID, and we are very proud of this, we are now supporting next-generation biopharmaceuticals against cancer in Sweden. In Finland, we are backing the development and commercialization of quantum computers. In Spain, we are helping turn used cooking oils into clean energy and harvesting solar power to produce green hydrogen. Our economies in the EU were lucky to have so far been cushioned by government spending from the worst impacts of the war. But the energy crisis has depleted a lot of the investment budgets of both governments and firms, and definitely private households. And that at a time when we have to invest more rather than less, both to combat climate change and to wean ourselves off Russian oil and gas. And it shows again, in such a situation of extreme crisis, investment suffers first. Chronic investment gaps are certain to get a lot worse. When you exclude investment in housing, you see that productive investment in Europe is a whole 2% of GDP per annum lower in the EU than in the United States, a gap that opened up a decade ago and that is most certainly going to grow until we do something collectively against it. Before going into more detail about this, let me allow me some somewhat personal comment. The tragic events in Ukraine are an opportunity to reflect on our past actions and our future conduct. We have seen the Ukrainian people respond with resilience and commitment. Our own response to the crisis is a litmus test for our character as leaders and as policymakers. And as the meetings in Kiev today and tomorrow demonstrate, the EU is in this for as long as it takes. The horrible war in Ukraine has proved that decarbonization is the only reliable and ethical way to ensure access to affordable energy for Europeans and the world at large. It is clear to everyone that this is the way forward. Russia's blackmail over gas supplies shows that we at the EIB were on the right side of history when we decided to stop fossil fuel infrastructure and focus our resources on clean energy in 2019. And we were on the right side of history when in 2014, after the annexation of Crimea, we decided to stop our business in Russia and redirect our funds, our possibilities to help to other parts of Central, Eastern and Southeastern Europe. I'm putting into question the decision by many governments to find short-term solutions to the current energy crunch, of course. But as a long-term investor, it was, and it continues to be, the right decision to concentrate our resources on making the energy system of the EU economy cleaner and more sustainable. Ladies and gentlemen, in 2022, our clean energy financing reached 19.4 billion euros, a record high. At a time of extreme energy insecurity, we backed the upgrade of the Czech electricity grid with a loan of 790 million euros, our largest ever in that country. In Poland, we provided more than 400 million euros to integrate renewables into the network. And in France, we financed some of Europe's first pre-commercial scale floating wind farms. Technology that will open deeper seas around the EU and the world to clean, renewable energy. It will be a game changer. We are working along the whole value chain to accelerate the electrification of our economies, from supporting the production of advanced lithium-ion battery cells in the Netherlands to financing construction of a 1,000-kilometer-long submarine cable that will connect renewable power plants in Sicily and Sardinia to Italy's grid. And with our package of support for the Repower EU initiative, we will do even more, providing an additional 30 billion euros in energy loans and equity financing for high-impact energy projects over the next 5 years. That is on top of our regular lending. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm proud of what EIB did in 2022 and is doing to help Ukraine directly. As we speak, EIB financing is helping to build or rebuild schools and health facilities from Odessa to Kiev. Our technical assistance is helping Kharkiv get war-ravaged trams back on their tracks, and our funds support emergency repairs to the country's bomb-damaged roads. Thanks to support from the EU budget, we were among the first to provide help for the Ukraine government to keep it going as early as last March. Since then, we have disbursed 1.7 billion euros to Ukraine under exceptionally difficult circumstances. We have another 540 million euros still to disburse as concrete projects on the ground progress. The support does not fall from the skies. We have been one of the most active project financiers in the country for many years now. And of course, this was possible because we drew the consequences of 2014, Russia's annexation of Crimea. Today, we are working with the European Council and the Commission to see how we can maintain our activity in Ukraine. Support for individual project financing, along with short-term liquidity support, is essential to help the country's economy. Public discourse is often too narrow when it comes to support for Ukraine, focus on military aid mostly. And although I strongly support the military support given to Ukraine, I think making sure that Ukraine's economy stays afloat through concrete projects is, in my view, at least equally critical for the country to prevail. We must not forget that the strongest support for the Ukrainian forces on the ground comes from the country itself and its economy. It would also be foolish to believe that reconstruction can be funded exclusively by external sources. This will matter, of course, but the most important task has to be to ensure that the Ukrainian economy will be able to support large parts of the country's reconstruction effort itself. And this is where we need to focus our energy. And that effort has to start today. We cannot wait until one day the ink under a peace treaty is dry. Ladies and gentlemen, the EIB has committed to raise its finance for renewable energies way before the war as part of our contribution towards Europe's Green Deal. We remain committed to these goals. Indeed, in 2022, we exceeded our commitment to dedicate half of our total financing to climate action and environmental sustainability. Our 36.5 billion euros of lending supported 147 billion euros in green investment. That puts us on track to meet our targets of mobilizing 1 trillion euros for climate projects this decade. You remember this was one of the promises of the new energy lending policy and our announcement at the climate summit in the United Nations General Assembly in 2019. We are well on track to meet this 1 trillion objective. Over the past months, we have heard again and again discussions about slowing the green transition because of the war and its impact on fuel and energy prices. If you allow me, this makes little or no sense. We must realize that the question of energy security and the fight against climate change are two sides of the same coin. The hard truth is that Europe needs to accelerate its switch to renewable energy, not just to meet its climate targets, but also to cut its dependency on imports. Unfortunately, it remains the case that for many years of our economy, we still lack competitive alternatives to fossil fuels. Our economists estimate that about half of global greenhouse gas emissions come from activities for which clean alternatives are not yet available, at least at a commercially viable stage. Investments in new climate technologies remain, therefore, a key area of attention for us. If there is one area where Europe can still claim global technological leadership, it is at the intersection of green and digital technologies. Our economists estimate that the EU can claim 75% more patents in this area than the US and 4 times as many as China. Here, we are still in the lead, and we better protect that position. We must make sure that we do not lose out on this front now by providing substantial support for investment in key climate technologies the US Inflation Reduction Act provides a powerful incentive for investment resources to bypass the EU. Europe will need to find a clear response to this, and we therefore welcome the ongoing discussions, and we are ready to be part of this discussion. The largest part of the investment needed to get to net zero will have to come from private funding. The largest part of the investments needed to get to net zero will have to come from private funding. And the EIB group has shown through European Fund for Strategic Investments, so-called Juncker Plan, and now InvestEU, how it can help crowd in and mobilize such investment. At the EIB group, we will soon have up and running a multi-billion fund of funds, the European Tech Champions Initiative, that will keep European innovators, in particular those at a later stage, from moving offshore. It is to be managed by our subsidiary, the European Investment Fund, and I'm happy to introduce our former Secretary General of the bank, now as the new CEO of the fund. And to my left, her successor in the bank, the new Secretary General of the bank, Barbara Balk. We stand ready to be the backbone of an EU-wide investment initiative in strategically important sectors to strengthen Europe's economy and European economic resilience, if mandated by our shareholders, the EU member states. Talking of sovereignty, we should not forget that Europe's defense requires support. While the EIB does not finance guns or explosives, we back European security with financing in dual-use sectors such as aerospace and cybersecurity. Here, too, we exceeded our targets and delivered well over 1 billion euros last year. Ladies and gentlemen, in strengthening Europe's strategic autonomy, it is vital to agree on common European solutions that complement national ones. Not all countries have equally deep pockets. Unless we ensure that a recovery from the crisis stands on a level playing field, we risk distorting our most prized achievement, the cohesion of our single market. Whatever Europe wants to do to respond to the many challenges we are facing, it is absolutely critical that we do it together. The damage, not just political, but also economic, from unbalanced measures at the country level, cannot be overstated. Reminds me of the situation when we discussed our reaction to the COVID challenge 3 years ago, when Christine Lagarde on behalf of European Central Bank, Klaus Regling on behalf of the ESM, and me on behalf of EIB, we went to the Eurogroup and then to the ECOFIN and said what we need, in addition to the national measures, is something that is fast, flexible, and European, because everything else would lead to an undermining of the integrity of the internal market. I'm glad to report that almost half, 45%, of our financing inside the EU in 2022 was channeled to cohesion regions, again exceeding our targets. Allow me one last remark. Last year was marked by the establishment of EIB Global, our dedicated arm for the EU's development and partnership activities. And this was spot on. In the first year of operations, EIB Global delivered, in addition to the 1.7 billion of financing for Ukraine, 9.1 billion euros in new project signatures. These included solar power plants in Brazil, further support for next vaccination initiatives around the world, and making sure that people of Jordan have access to clean water by funding one of the largest desalination plants in the world. Our projects showcase how the EIB advances EU policies around the world. Yes, the EU needs to strengthen its strategic autonomy, but it will not achieve that by taking an inward-looking perspective. If we want to strengthen the EU's resilience, we need to forge new, sustainable partnerships and alliances around the globe. I'm very proud that with EIB Global and Markus Berndt as the Acting Director General, we are making an active contribution to this under the banner of the EU. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attention, and we are happy to take your questions.
Thank you, President. We're just going to go into Q&A, which, courtesy of COVID-19, will entail a degree of movement. You have to reach the microphones. The microphones will not come to you. Please identify yourselves and the outlet you work for. I had one question here. We'll try and regroup them. 1, 2, and 3, and then we go on to the next.
Good morning. Karl de Meyer for the French daily Les Echos. Next week, the heads of government and will meet here in Brussels to discuss the response to the IRA. A lot of politicians have already mentioned the EIB at the core of this response. Can you please elaborate on what you think the EIB can do in this response? And there is talk of a sovereignty fund. Many politicians think the EIB should be at the core of this new fund. What are your ideas? Have you started to think about what it could look like and what its governance could be? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please, and then Vince.
Thank you. Paula Tama for Political Europe. I have two questions, if I may, President. One is, how are you planning and when are you planning to respond to EU leaders' call to step up support for Ukraine? Is new financing from your shareholders necessary? Are you in talks with the Commission for new budgetary guarantees? What can you do, basically, and when? And secondly, your mandate is coming to an end this year. Can you give us a bit of a timeline on how this process will work, and if you have a preference of whether it should be a man or a woman, a Southern or a Northerner, taking your job? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vince. And then we take these questions in a group.
Thank you. Hi, Vince Chadwick from Devex. I question about multilateral development bank reform. Obviously, the World Bank's released their roadmap. Some people say it's not ambitious enough. I wonder how you assess that contribution and also what this year could bring for EIB when Janet Yellen says that all MDBs need to think about changing its, given your shareholding, probably not likely to jump at whatever she says, but at least a sense of how EIB is viewing its positioning itself this year in a real focus on MDB reform. And when it comes to the global gateway, I wanted to get your assessment of whether the gateway needs a special envoy to help sell the brand and whether that envoy should be Mario Draghi. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We go into answers at this point, and then we'll take 3 more.
At least I will try to give some answers. On the last one, definitely not hear it for the first time. So, and I'm really an admirer and a good friend of Mario Draghi, but whether he intends to do something like this, for heavens, I don't know. But I welcome every activity of Mario Draghi on the European scene, whatever he does. But one after the other. Sovereignty fund. Well, lots of ideas are presently floating around. And of course, we are reading and listening in Luxembourg as well. And I see what comes from several governments. I see what comes from the President of the European Council, from the President of the European Commission. So at the end of the day, our political leaders must come with a comprehensive and strong response to IRA and other challenges in this world. We are a policy-first institution, so we need to know what our political leaders want. And there is no consensus yet. I see the contradictions. Whatever is clear, however, is that whichever way they choose to take next week, for instance, the European Council, or then in March again, we will be part of it. Because one truth is absolutely clear, today more than ever. These huge challenges that the European Union and its member states need to meet over the next years will be meetable, can be met only if we mobilize financial instruments. A pure recourse to budgetary thinking will not bring us to the necessary moves forward. So we need to mobilize the private sector. And the leverage institution of the European Union is EIB. So I'm sure we will have to play a role there. We do not want to push ourselves to the foreground at a time when the political leaders have not come to conclusions yet. But once they are at that stage, we are in. And I think we have the expertise and the technical experience of the last couple of years. I mean, I remember vividly when Jean-Claude Juncker arrived at the idea of, after a loss in the election in Luxembourg, he should place his bid for the presidency of the European Council. And he was sitting in the bank, in our bank, on the 9th floor in Luxembourg, and he said, well, what is obvious is we have a huge investment gap in Europe. So come up with an idea how to close that investment gap. The result was then what was later called the Juncker Plan, or the European Fund for Strategic Investments. A couple of years later, we were confronted with this terrible COVID challenge. And again, it was necessary to come up with a big financing scheme. And we said, okay, we will not get the budgetary means in order to finance all what is necessary in order to arrive at necessary not only vaccines but also diagnostics and other pharmaceutical progresses. We will try to set up something on the basis of guarantees. So we asked the member states, our shareholders, to give us guarantees in order to finance projects which would keep the economy afloat in the member states of the European Union and develop to the finding and development of diagnostics and vaccines and therapeuticals. So that was another way to do it, an EGF, European Guarantee Fund. Also, this is a model that can be replicated. So we are quite open when it comes to the political direction that the European leaders must give us. And once they have done that, and they can have our advice any time, we'll be in. Ukraine. You have taken note of my passion for the support of Ukraine and the European response to this. And it is clear that we would love to continue what we have been doing, to even do more, and the projects are at hand. So we did not interfere with the negotiations of the Member States and the European Commission when it comes to the macro-financial assistance that has been decided before Christmas. So that is under the roof now. We did not go for asking for support at that time because Member States needed to mobilize these 18 billion per year first. They did. And now we are going to go back and say, okay, if you want us to do more, we need support. Because what we are doing in Ukraine is, of course, bloody risky. But we have experience with risky investments. Technological progress, for instance, is not possible without your readiness to take risks. But when you take these huge risks and still want to preserve the soundness of the financial institution which we are, and I look into the eyes of our chief risk officer, we must protect this huge balance sheet of the bank. And therefore we will need guarantees. And I'm very optimistic. I'm very confident that we will get the shareholder support, which the rating agencies always mention of one of the strongest pillars of EIB, shareholder support. Vince Chadwick touched upon the issue of Janet Yellen and the MDB reform. Well, there's a huge discussion going on in the context of G20 and in other formats. And I can fully understand the expectation of our political leaders that they want more support from the multilateral development banks as they see right now. I'm not going to make comments or judgments about other institutions, but I only say one thing. It would be an illusion to believe that one-size-fits-all solutions could bring us where we need to go. These, and I chaired the 10 MDBs last year, the 10 biggest ones on a global scale. It would be an illusion to believe that they all need to take the same measures. Look at the differences. Look at how incredibly far EIB is leveraged there is nobody in the MDB world who can compare with that. Look at the balance sheet of 550 or something billion euros, and how much have the member states of the European Union, our owners, paid in form of cash? Roughly 25 billion. This is a leverage factor which is second to none in the world, and therefore it is not up to me to give advice to other MDBs. We are discussing in that circle all the time and try to learn from one another. Whenever we can do more, and when there are good ideas enabling us to do more, we are ready to do so. But one is quite clear. We will not put the solidity of this bank into doubt. Because in order to do what we do, on the basis of only 25 billion cashed in, we need to tap the capital markets every year by borrowing 70 to 100 billion euros by selling our bonds. And you need to have the confidence of your investors when you want them to give you their money. So this bank is solid like a rock, and that will remain.
Thank you, President. Okay, we've got another group of questions. Paolo, we'll come to you again in a sec.
Sorry. This very interesting question about my succession. I'm not thinking that far ahead, to be honest. Who knows what's going to happen in 6 years or so? The statutes of the bank or the Treaty on the European Union doesn't say anything about a limitation of the number of mandates for a member of the management committee of the bank. So I'll discuss that with the governors in due course.
Okay. We got here, then the gentleman, and then the gentleman back there, and then we go to another group there.
Thank you. This is Gabriela Baczynska, Reuters. I wanted to ask you, President, to tell us a bit more about the support for Ukraine. You said you want to be able to do the same or more this year. So can you give us a ballpark figure? You've done 2.2, 2.3 billion so far. Where would you like to focus the funding this year? What exactly will you be asking the member states for? And when can you start contracting new projects? Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. This is the wonderful opportunity for me to introduce our new head of EIB Global, Markus Berndt, who is busy with this question from morning to night and from night to morning. So maybe, Markus, you take over this one.
Well, thank you very much for the question. Well, Ukraine has, the war in Ukraine has moved from a blitzkrieg to a war of attrition. So what is most important for Ukraine right now is to strengthen the main engine to support the resilience of the Ukrainians, and which is the Ukrainian economy. So that's where our focus is at this very moment. And that is two pillars, the strategy of our support of Ukraine. One is to strengthen the socio-economic resilience, meaning support infrastructure repairs and investments, heat, energy, transport, water, municipal investments, schools and hospitals. We have been very active in these areas since 2014, because unfortunately there were recovery investments already to be done since then, and we are this is one of the core pillars of our strategy going forward in the support of our Ukrainian partners. The second pillar is, of course, trying to catalyze private investments into Ukraine. We know that the Ukrainian future is inside the EU, so our support is aimed at supporting Ukraine's accession and the economy's accession to the European Union, as we have done with 22 member states before, since our foundation. We will therefore set up instruments that allow us to have our subsidiary, the EIF, being engaged in Ukraine, because Ukraine is now a candidate country, so we can ramp up new instruments to support the private sector. In regards to the question of what we need, I think it's important to stress that the EIB is very well capitalized at this point in time, but we do need we discuss ways to make budgetary support available to EIB Global in order to make sure that our financing is affordable and is risk-bearing enough to catalyze private investment into Ukraine's future and the future of Europe.
Thank you. Yes, we have the gentleman and then there.
Barzan Hassan, reporter from Kursan 24. Recently, investment project outside Europe, you have some in Morocco, Caribbean, Senegal, Brazil, Montenegro. Could you tell me, do you have any business in Iraq or Iraqi Kurdistan region? Thank you.
Thanks. And a question there.
Good morning. Jorge Valero with Bloomberg. Two questions, please, as well. First one, looking at the investment committed on clean tech at EU level by 2030, I think is 380 billion euros. And also what other big countries are doing, US and China. What would be your assessment in terms of the investment gap, investment needs that still need to be fulfilled and therefore potentially covered by a sovereignty fund, region financing, additional EU funds, so on and so forth? And secondly, have you detected enough appetite among the members of the EIB to increase the guarantees in order to support either, clean tech in the context of the response to IRA, or to provide additional funding to Ukraine? And also, are you concerned that eventually these two priorities could somehow conflict with each other?
Thank you.
The latter must not happen. If we begin to orchestrate controversies between competitiveness and our position in the global market on the one hand, and the position on Ukraine on the other one, we have already lost. So these things must go together. But I would refer the more quantitative dimension of your question to the Director General for Operations in a couple of minutes. On Iraq, that was the first question. I do not recall any project in Iraq that I've ever dealt with. So I pass it on. Maybe I've overlooked something, Markus.
No. In order to operate in a country, in a partner country, we A, needs a mandate, and B, need a framework agreement. And none of that exists with Iraq.
Can you tell me the reason? Is it because of the corruption or security issue or something else? The reason, please.
I think we should take this, perhaps since it has to do with a very specific circumstance, unless you want to jump in. Let's talk about it as soon as we finish the open session. There was Paula. Did you want to come back in? No. There, please. Okay, and you're going to follow through in a second.
Now I've passed the floor to Jean-Christophe Laloux, the head of operations, and the head of the project directorate, Laura Piovesan. And then Margaret Faxted will also give the EIF dimension of the response.
Thank you, President. Good morning. So on clean tech, your assessment, indeed, the figures you're mentioning, several 100 billion euros investments required, match also those of the International Energy Agency. So roughly we need to multiply the rhythm of investment by 4 times. That's the estimate at the moment. So EIB is going to contribute to the effort. We are, amongst others, as announced, going to deploy, in the context of the REPowerEU program, we are going to significantly increase the financing efforts of the European Investment Bank by 30 billion euro of financing over the next 5 years. That will come in addition to what we were doing already before. A large part of that will go to clean tech, and we will also continue to look in the context of the Sovereignty Fund, or together with the European Commission and other partners, into new initiatives in that field to bring more risk-bearing capacity to the clean tech sector, which is absolutely essential in the years to come. But so our first response at the moment is that you can at least expect EIB to be present in the sector for 30 billion euros in addition to what we have been doing so far. That's the first layer of our response, but we expect that more will come.
No, indeed, I think clean tech is an important area of growth, an area where Europe is competitive and needs to step up at this point, is capacity to innovate and to build the capacity, to continue to build the industry. to do so, we need to show that Europe provides the right environment. So what we are doing, for example, in supporting sustainable infrastructure, in supporting renewable energy in particularly, is key. Because in order to step up these industries, you need to do it on the basis of having the renewable energy to power them. So the bank this year has continued to step up what we are doing and the group in sustainable energy and in particular in renewable energy. And this is something is going to continue to be our objectives in the years to come.
Thank you. I would like to make the point that while it is so important to talk about the clean tech and the investment gap, we should not look into this in isolation. There are other areas like space technologies that can be very supportive in this area. It can be digital technologies and so on. So all these sectors, they go hand in hand in order to increase indeed the strategic autonomy of European Union and help us to innovate. And now in helping us to innovate, we need skilled labor. And you certainly know that one of the investment barriers is access to skilled labor, in addition to access to finance, access, having the right legal or administrative or regulatory environment. And when I'm talking about skilled labor, I would also like to make the point that for skilled labor, we need all parts of the population, so women and men alike. And I think here, for example, in clean tech, we have a huge problem that there are not enough women in clean tech. Not in being educated or skilled up for this, and not enough entrepreneurs, women-led entrepreneurs in the clean technologies. And now to finalize, I think the combination of the EIB and the EIF is important. EIB supporting corporates through venture debt, all these wonderful lending activities and infrastructure. And EIF can combine that because we can support the early stages of the companies through venture capital, for example. And once the companies have grown, we have now this wonderful initiative which is coming, the ETCI, which will be signed in a couple of weeks. And this will be absolutely important going forward to scaling up European Union companies in their endeavor to become the champions in the European Union. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. We have a question there, here, and there.
Is this on? Okay. Carsten Wolkerich from Handelsblatt. Mr. Hoyer, the question from Jorge on the guarantees and the willingness of member states to actually increase guarantees or even maybe your capital, is that necessary for all these challenges and tasks you described?
Thank you. Just the question here.
Hi, Alice Hancock, Financial Times. I similarly wanted to ask about the guarantees, just if you could give us sort of a sense of timeline, potentially what the state of play with talks with member states are to follow on, specifically in the light of Ukraine. And also, given the sort of corruption scandal and cleanup that's going on in Ukraine at the moment, could you tell us a bit about how happy you are with the marshalling of funds in Ukraine, and more broadly, as you step up EIB Global, how you view the bank's due diligence processes? Thanks.
And finally, one last in this group, and then.
Thank you, Aurélie Pigné for Brussels too. I wanted to go back to the conclusions of the European Council back in May, which asked for an enhanced role of the EIB on the support for European security and defence, and I wanted to know what's been done since and what are the next steps in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. On the last question, I mentioned the surprisingly high figure of 1 billion activity in this field last year. So we are, in particular when it comes to high-tech solutions, but we will not cross the red line towards financing the production of weapons and ammunition. So this is the line that we need to observe. But below that, we are happy and we are in. And if you look at the realities of life, you see that dual use is the normal case nowadays. On the back on the guarantees, I'm confident that since it is intellectually clear that the role of the bank can only be played out if we protect also the bank's balance sheet, the member states and the European Commission will be ready to come in on this. I'm not at all pessimistic there. it would be a huge blamage for the European Union if we could not continue our activities there. So I'm quite optimistic that everybody sees that. The question of corruption and the use of our funds in Ukraine and other places, that is very, very interesting. And I tell you, I'm far from being naive. I've made my experiences in Ukraine before Mr. Zelensky took over, and I'm a realist when it comes to these problems in this country, and partly an endemic corruption that has been there. And I must say I can praise the Ukraine government in order to go against it and to try to make sure that those who support Ukraine now can be reassured that the use of the money is correct. Yesterday I had an exchange with the head of our General Inspectorate, who has a very close look at this and who is in very close contact with the compliance and integrity colleagues in other international institutions, and also with the public prosecutors in the member states. And I can only reassure you that although nothing human is alien to me, we do what can be done in order to protect the integrity of the use of our funds. That is, in Ukraine, not easy, and therefore I welcome the clear position of President Zelensky on these issues, which have led to dramatic decisions over the last couple of weeks. I think this... Have I overlooked something? No.
I think that covers it. More questions? Sorry. Yes.
Hi, John Ainger, Bloomberg News. In October, you announced extension to the exemptions of the PATH framework. I was wondering if you could elaborate on what progress has been made there. Are there already projects in the pipeline under those exemptions? And on gas, this time last year, I believe you said that the EU's proposed rules on gas and nuclear in the taxonomy would make investors feel drowsy. Do you stick by those comments, and will it affect the EIB's decision to invest in gas in the future? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other urgent questions at this stage? No, then we can take this one.
And I pass it right on to Jean-Christophe Laloux, because that's best placed with him.
Thank you. So to your specific question, have we used this exemption to PATH, which indeed, President, with your agreement, my colleague Laura can comment exactly on what this exemption consists of. But this exemption, it opens indeed the floor for EIB to work with counterparts that under our general policy so far we could not work with for specific projects that are related to renewable energy. And we have used that exemption indeed once so far. We have signed a project for Repsol in Spain, for a very interesting project of sustainable fuel. And we indeed believe that there will be few others in the coming years that will make use of that exemption. I want to stress that EIB is working under the exemption only to finance zero emission projects and renewable energy, because there is one sure thing at the moment, is that, as also mentioned before, related to that question of investment, we need to speed up investments into renewable energy, and it is difficult to think that we're going to have too many of those. So the more we have, the better it is. Thank you.
Laura, would you like to join here at this point?
Yes. With the PATH framework, what we are doing is working with companies in their transition to a zero carbon economy. So not only we need to invest in renewable energy, but we also need to support the transition. And we do that by engaging with companies which do have a decarbonization plan, but would allow them to reach net zero in alignment with a 1.5 degree decrease. So we continue to do that, and we do that also with those oil and gas companies which are engaged, which have decarbonization plan in place, and are investing in renewable energy, because that's been said, there is the need clearly now to step up and accelerate this investment. So the exemption is limited to some incompatible activities and does not take away the fact that these companies need to have a strong decarbonization plan in place.
Thank you, Laura. We're gently coming to the end of our time. Yes, please, you can.
Indeed, we do have our energy lending policy, which remains in place. When discussing Repower EU last October, the board confirmed that our energy lending policy is valid. So the principles that we have remain in place, and we remain committed to not supporting investments in unabated fossil fuels.
Okay, so I think if there are no further urgent questions, I think we can wrap up at this point. We've run out of time, so thank you very, very much for coming, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, Matteo.